So I had to continue where I left off at the end of the first session, which you remember was the induction, followed by movement in the lifetime as Seán from age 12 to 4 to in utero, and then into the immediate past life up to the time of the death, and the parting with the red-headed woman. So the process continues now at this stage. Matt, I want you to move into the between lives, Les. Do you see the earth? Yeah, perfectly. Just like a little green-blue globe in the sky. Matt, do you feel any kind of pulling sensation? Seán, I feel like I really want to laugh at how much I had bought into the illusion of being male, Russian, a soldier. And now I see that was the drama I agreed to. But I got so fooled by it. It's humorous now. Matt, as you continue to move, Seán, I've left the earth now. Matt, can you give me just a little impression of where you are now in relationship to your surroundings? Seán, I feel like I'm in a place of just light and green fields, lots of space, and some kind of a portal just to leave this dimension. And I know that in some senses, this too is an illusion. This is what I need to create for this stage of the journey. It's no more real and no less real than the earth is. It's the appropriate state to transition. Matt, the space about you is light. Seán, light, yeah, lots of light. Matt, do you have a feeling you've been here before? Seán, yeah, I know this road well. Matt, let yourself just keep moving towards some loving power. Can you see anything now apart from your immediate surroundings? Yeah, I can see people waiting. There's like a little wooden fence across a field, and they're making a joke. They're tapping their wrists and saying, "What's keeping you?" And two of them in particular have agreed to put on costumes by which I would have recognized them on planet Earth. My grandfather, that I used to call Daddy Jim, and my great-grandmother, that I used to call Muddy. And she was a small, squat little lady, as wide as she was high. And probably the greatest mystic I've ever come across in this lifetime. Matt, from this lifetime, Seán's lifetime? Seán, hey, yeah, Seán's. Matt, they were very important to you? Seán, yeah, they were. One of the things I realize is that I'm going to meet myself up there as well. That I did not commit even the majority of my energy to this soldier lifetime. I knew it was going to be brief, and it wasn't that demanding. And these characters in my life, all of them, retain soul energy that is not committed to incarnation. So they've been important players in my life many times. I see Ireland's soul energy as well. Although that girl in the concentration camp, she's still on Earth. Her soul too retains a large part of her up here, where her real home is. And I see a Christ figure, and he makes a joke. He says, "So, you were Russian Orthodox this time?" And we crack up. He says, "Do you really think that is what I was about?" And he knows that I know that it was not. So we laugh about it. Matt, how do you feel greeting these souls? Seán, I feel the most important thing that's coming through is the humor of the situation, the realization of the intensity with which I lived and which we live, incarnational experiences, as if that were the defining characteristics. And it's all radically true when it's just a play that we dream up. And it's funny to me that we get sucked in time after time after time. And that we forget so easily who we really are and what we're really about. And so it's just like we're cracking up and saying, can you believe it? We did it again. It's not like it's not important, but it's only important as a kind of a learning tool. And we're meant to be able to remember that it's not about that, and it's not ultimately our origin, our final state. Matt, what's happening now? Seán, they're saying, okay, you need to move. Do what you need to do right now. The Christ figure has disappeared. I know that I'm going to meet him again later on. This was just the first encounter. So now I just let go of them and they all disappear. Matt, let yourself keep moving. Seán, the first place I want to go to is a healing center. And I realized that the bullet wound wasn't the most important wound, that it's the wound of buying into prejudice. And insofar as there's any of that left, I need to just shed it. So I find myself in a healing environment, and I'm being invited to let go from the very fabric of my being any results of anger or prejudice or indoctrination, or any personal wounds from family stuff or individual encounters. Matt, how do you heal in that place? Seán, I heal by just realizing from the inside out that when I let my core spirit speak and be free and unencumbered, that heals me from the core outwards. And my mind and my emotions and my spirit are just being set free. Matt, are there other souls there to help you? Seán, there are, yeah. I feel like mostly they're there to create an environment of acceptance and total non-judgment. It's not like they have to do any great medical procedures or psychological interventions, but just to create the energy and the atmosphere and the ethos for the soul to purify itself, to shed all the accretions of incarnation. Matt, and when you're ready, just move on. Seán, I'm ready to go. Matt, let yourself go. Seán, I feel like I want to go to those who mentored me in preparation for that lifetime, to debrief with them so I can really understand from this perspective what it's all about. Matt, why don't you go to that place now? Seán, again, for many of these encounters, the energies of the beings will wear costumes that will clue me in quickly and crudely to who they are. But I know that these are just costumes, not the essence, not the core, but we play the game anyway. And so I see an angelic figure, and I know who it is. It is my angel guardian, Lauren. Lauren has prepared me for my lifetimes, for many lifetimes, including the last two. Matt, do you see anybody else? Seán? No, just Lauren. Matt, is there something you feel being communicated to you? Seán, yeah. Firstly, there is total acceptance and love, an all-over embrace to the core of my being. And this same sense of humor and laughter and playfulness seems to be really endemic. I hear the thought, that was short and sweet. What I hear myself conveying, or what I feel is being communicated, is the importance of commitment to the journey and the mission, even though we don't understand where it's going to take us or what the next step is going to be. I had no idea on that day's march how it was going to end or who I was going to see or encounter. But something within me told me that was where I needed to be. And so the ability to trust that process and to realize that every single moment is sufficient unto itself, and that the present moment doesn't lack anything, ever. That there is as much enlightenment in the very simple task of taking the next step in big boots toward a concentration camp as there is in worshipping the divine or meditating in a cave. And I got it that that recognition spans lifetimes. When I saw the look in that girl's eyes, time and uniform and ethnicity, none of these mattered. They all fell off. And I hear, coming from Lauren, that maybe one of my primary tasks in the last few lifetimes is to hold that realization even in waking consciousness, to never be fooled by the exterior, never to buy into the prejudices of religious affiliation, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, or IQ level, or rank, or dogma, never to buy into the prejudices of religious affiliation, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, or IQ level, or rank, or dogma. They're all made up. To be able to resonate core to core, and spirit to spirit, and soul to soul, and to get that not just intellectually, but to get it in the rawness of every cell. Matt, that feels like a basic truth. Seán, yeah, yeah, yeah. It feels like that to the extent that I lose sight of that, or that the world loses sight of that, that we only then notice the differences between us. And we relate on the basis of difference. And then dogma builds on the differences, and violence builds on the dogma. And I realize as well something that he's communicating to me, that he's saying this to me, and of course it's not just true for me. He's saying to me, you are much older than any institution you've ever encountered in this lifetime. Everything you've encountered is a mere 1,000 years old or 5,000 years old. It is the blink of an eye. You existed before Homo sapiens sapiens came into being, or before the Big Bang. And so to be subservient to any institution, or identifying myself as an affiliate or a member of or a servant of any organization, is kind of silly. It's not that I don't have to be a member or be part of a community, but I can't identify my core essence with that. Matt, does it feel like there's more you need to do to debrief? Seán, yeah. I want to ask him about Ireland, about this red-headed girl behind the wire. And what I'm getting is that we have missed like this, just come within millimeters of merging in so many lifetimes. And what I hear coming across is, when you need divinity as badly as you need to consummate that meeting, then you'll be enlightened. So it feels like we have played out this drama to really sharpen that longing, that pain and loneliness of separation, of not really having gotten together. And that really, it is about the illusion of separation from God. Matt, the purpose of that longing over many lifetimes is to teach you, is to teach me that when I desire ultimate truth and ultimate light and ultimate divinity, as badly as I desire that, then I will be totally at peace. I will have arrived at the center. Matt, so it's a teaching for your soul, Seán? Yeah. This is only a teaching mechanism. The purpose is not the unification of souls, even though that's a channel for it. The purpose is letting go of all illusions of separation from the divine. And that separation can only be ended when the longing is so intense that I can't bear it anymore. Matt, you feel at peace? Seán? Yes, absolutely. Matt, what do you need to do? Seán, I just need to give Lauren a kind of a hug. And it's interesting. Hugs feel just like energies merging and waltzing and dancing and then separating. It's not like hands around shoulders. It's like energies just commingling. And I'm ready to move. So, yeah, I want to just make one comment first and then take questions. I think it may have been, if I'm not mistaken, it may have been Elizabeth up in Canada who asked that question this morning that I said I would kind of talk at more detail. That was the reason for the kind of the failed attempts at connection with Ireland over many, many lifetimes. It was a lesson that we both agreed to come so close and never managed to get together so many times. That I can say definitely from my side that the lesson and the thing I signed up for, even though I didn't remember it during any incarnation, was that I needed to feel the pain of separation so intensely from God that I would never buy into that illusion again. And that she and I agreed to participate in this really, really, really painful exercise of coming so close on so many occasions and still not being able to be together. And I think that I really got it this time. And you know, in the core of my being at this stage, the deepest longing in my soul is to realize that there is only God. And I wrote this in the Eucharistic Prayer of the Cosmos. You know, we are not separate from God. We are not separate from each other. And we are not separate from nature. Separation is an illusion, but it's a very important illusion because it does an extraordinary lesson. There are some things that can only be learned from experience. You can't read about them or hear of them. You have to experience it yourself. And for me, the lesson repeated again and again and again until finally even I got it. That any intense sadness over separation is nostalgia for home. And that has kind of been, that's been the driving force of my life as a priest and as a member of COJ for the last 18 years. I know it without the slightest doubt that all longing is nostalgia for home. So whatever relationship we find ourselves in, whether it's a connection to a person or a place or a profession or one's health, that all that sense of separation and longing, we agree to in order to experientially understand and get it, that there is only God and that we are holographic fractals of source. And we get that, life changes immeasurably. Every situation can be harvested for that realization subsequently. So I thank Garland, Arlie, if you're listening this morning, I thank you for agreeing to that extraordinary contract. I'm sure there have been many, many painful memories for you in other lifetimes. I thank you for being willing to make that sacrifice. Namaste, my soulmate. Now, if there are any comments or questions, so a question left over from this morning that was in the chat was, is it possible at the other side to make the decision, I don't ever want to come back? It is possible, but those souls don't grow as much. So there's a great parable that Jesus talks about. He says, there's more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 sinners who don't need to repent. But I recast that, I reframe that, and I say, there is more joy in heaven over one soul who volunteers for reincarnation than 99 souls who want to stay close to Daddy. So there's peace there, but there's not the same level of opportunity for experiencing that longing for God. When you're, we say absence makes the heart grow fond in Irish. So the kind of the illusion, the experience of the illusion of separation from source is the thing which draws us closer and closer to source. And so being at source all the time without any opportunity to experience the absence of source, it's not going to grow your love for God in the same way that separation from God is going to grow you. So yes, it is possible to make the decision not to come back, not to incarnate at all, and be perfectly happy. But you have no understanding just, what that happiness could be if you have the cojones to separate temporarily and then rejoin. To the souls at the other side who decide not to come in, are they still benefiting and growing from those of us who do come in? Because in some senses they're witnessing what can happen. It's yes, they do benefit from it in the same way that spectators can benefit from watching their team win a game. There's great joy in, wow, look how we just did. But there's totally different from actually, let's just use a basketball metaphor because we're in March Madness right now. So the difference between watching your team win the tournament and jumping for joy around the place, and the difference between that and being one of the team members on the court, who had to learn to throw a 3-point shot with 0.4 seconds left on the clock, is radically different. So yeah, they're benefiting and they're enjoying it, but there's a huge difference between being a spectator at an event and being a participant in the event. So Bill's question is, do you learn more from agreeing to and experiencing a very difficult life as from experiencing, an easier life? There are two very different kinds of learning. One is kind of, let me just use the notion of compassion as a kind of a mission for a lifetime. I want to learn compassion. And so one way of learning compassion is that I'm born into a kind of handicapped body, maybe a Down syndrome child, and I need to be taken care of. So I'm experiencing compassion as the recipient of the love of others and not being able to do for myself or being physically handicapped in some way. That's a learning. There's another form of learning where I agree to be the caretaker for a Down syndrome child. We have such a situation in our own community. A woman who's dedicated her life to looking after her Down syndrome brother. And you all know who that person is in our community. And so you could choose to be born, and become a millionaire or a billionaire even. And then the question is, can you still exercise compassion as a billionaire? What are you going to do with your money? Are you going to reach out and make a difference in the world? So it's possible to be born into very easy circumstances with lots of resources available and to utilize that to exercise compassion for a global community. And at the same time, to be born into a situation where you're a homeless person begging at the side of the street and learning what it's like to need to be the recipient of compassion. So even a single virtue like compassion is so multifaceted that you have to approach it from many different levels in order to kind of fully harvest what the virtue of compassion might mean. So yes, in answer to your question, Bill, you can, depending on the evolutionary status of the soul, a situation of plenty and ease can be an opportunity equal to that of being without, as far as learning a particular virtue is concerned. So that's a huge question. So Corey's question is, talking about my experience personally, that seems to be a wake-up call. Why isn't it happening more widely? If there is a movement toward awakening, why have religious leaders particularly held us back? And it's a very important observation. And what I've seen very definitely is that when I study history, not just of religions, economic models, NGOs, kind of helping systems, that every kind of movement towards light or towards service of people goes through the following stages. And I see this again and again and again. The first, so let's focus on religion. Every great religion is the result of some kind of a mystical impulse from some kind of a great avatar, a Buddha figure or a Jesus figure, like that. So some mystical experience by some kind of an extraordinary avatar. That's stage one. The next stage is that this is such a charismatic individual that there are disciples who gather around her. So that's stage two. Stage three is that that prophetic figure or that charismatic individual almost inevitably is going to be assassinated. It's going to wind up dead because there's such a threat to the status quo. So inevitably stage three is an assassination or the death of the prophetic figure. Stage four is that some kind of an organization now builds up around the memory of that charismatic individual. So some kind of a community forms, which is great. Stage five is, at some stage, that organization is taken over by some kind of a self-appointed oligarchy who rise to the top. And they're always very deeply narcissistic individuals. And so you can look at any hierarchical system and you'll find that the percentage of psychopaths in the population in general is between 1% and 2%. You look at the upper echelons of politics, of the church, of economic models, of the military-industrial complex, and psychopathology is vastly overrepresented in those organizations. So stage five is that this kind of an oligarchy get to the top. Either they promote themselves or they're appointed and they get the positions of power. That's stage five. Stage six is they now insist on some kind of orthodoxy. Here are the rules. Here's what you have to believe in. There are creedal formulations. And if you don't accept these, you can't be one of us. That's the next stage. Stage six is they now initiate crusades against outsiders who don't believe the same way that we believe in. And then they're prepared to murder individuals in the name of somebody who said, those who take the sword will die by the sword. Turn the other cheek. In the memory of that man, they're going to have crusades across Europe and decimate tens of thousands of people. So that's the next stage. The stage after that is they now look at inside the organization and which people inside the organization have heterodoxical belief systems, and now they're going to be tortured and inquisited and literally torn apart, physically torn apart. And then at some stage, there's some new prophetic figure like St. Francis of Assisi in the 1200s who said, guys, this is not what it's about. This is not what the master taught. Let's get back to the original teachings. And so he sets up a new community of his own. We call them the Franciscans. And they're totally dedicated to the vision that Francis has. And I have a belief system, actually, that Jesus has reincarnated many, many times. That one incarnation of the figure we know as Jesus was the Buddha. And I think a second incarnation was Francis of Assisi. And that Francis came to kind of call us back to our roots. And for a while, he kind of shook up the system. He created this group, the Franciscans. Francis lived in the 1200s. Within 200 years, the Franciscan order that Francis set up were in charge of the Inquisition. They were the guys literally tearing people limb from limb. So we go through the same cycle again and again and again. So to answer your question directly, Corey, inevitably, mystical impulses are taken over by religions. So you reduce mysticism to religion, then you reduce religion to morality, and then very typically you reduce, particularly in Christian systems, you reduce morality to sexuality. And the greatest sin of all is some kind of sexual misbehavior. And so you reduce it right down to kind of breaking some kind of a sexual moral code. And then you have the cycle repeat again and again and again. And as well as that, you get people in positions of power who are not spiritual people. And as well as that, there's an influence from outside. Sometime last year, before I go to bed at night, I try to seed my dreams and ask the part of me that's still at heaven, give me some ideas, about things I'm wrestling with in waking consciousness. So I went to sleep with this question in my mind: what is the difference between sin and evil? And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I wake up, and as clear as a bell, I get it. The following proclamation: sin is the individual transgression of a culturally created precept. It's the breaking of a law that was made by people to begin with. Evil is a cosmic conspiracy using human intermediaries to separate souls from source. That there literally are, you can call them extraterrestrial, ultra-dimensional, I don't care what you call them, but that there are, Buddhism will call it tulpas, congealed energy forms, where you can personalize them or anthropomorphize them, whatever you want to do. But that there are dark energies and dark forces that have constellated and have an agenda for planet Earth. And that very, very often the religious leaders make Faustian agreements with these. I'll trade, my soul for a position of power within this institution. And that at the higher ranks of many of the great religions, there are people with individuals who are in the employ of, you want to call it Satan, for want of a better word. And so Paul would say very famously in his letter to the Ephesians, our battle is not just against the forces of this world, but against the dark forces of the heavenly realms. And so we're caught in a kind of pincer movement between earthly endeavors and kind of extraterrestrial or in a kind of ultra-dimensional energies that have a very different agenda. That in the same way that, we can take pleasure in watching. Can you imagine what it's like for a Franciscan friar garbed as St. Francis was, pulling a human being, literally arm from arm, literally pulling their body apart, or taking, in the year 1600, burning at the stake? Who was the famous character that was burned at the stake in, no, not January, 1600? Giordano Bruno. Giordano Bruno literally burned at the stake. He'd been traveling all over Europe, preaching about the same kind of stuff. And because of his preaching, as he's tied to the stake, they pull out his tongue and they nail his tongue to the stake and then burn him alive. And this has been done by Franciscan friars, the heritage of Francis of Assisi. So you got these extraordinary demonic entities interfacing with human beings who are psychopaths. And thus the reins of the institutions have been handed over to people who have no spirituality, but a lot of lust for power. Waven Dean's question was, can I talk about the Anunnaki? So if you're a Bible scholar and you read the stories contained in Torah, particularly the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, you find out that all the great creation myths about the creation of Adam and Eve, about the temptation, about the loss of life where they're kicked out of the Garden of Eden, about the flood and about Noah and the ark, they're all contained in much, much earlier writings called the Sumerian texts. And the Sumerian texts go back at least 5000 BCE. And according to the Sumerian texts, there were kind of extraterrestrial entities called the Anunnaki. And Anunnaki is a Sumerian word meaning those who from the heavens to the earth came down. And so there's a series of writings. There was a library of a great king called Ashurbanipal that was discovered in the early 1900s, literally tens of thousands of fragments, about the creation stories. And the story was that these Anunnaki who resided in a planet called Nibiru, which has a 3,600-year orbit that is part of our solar system, but goes very, very far out and comes back in every 3,600 years. And that it's called Nibiru, this particular planet. And it's peopled by a group called the Anunnaki. And that they were running out of resources, they were having their own climate kind of chaos on the planet. And they needed gold in order to seed their own atmosphere. And it's interesting that our astronauts, in their spaceships, there's gold in the windshields of their craft to protect against ultraviolet radiation. So that they needed gold to spray their atmosphere in order that the planet didn't get devastated. And they came to Earth 425,000 years ago, to mine gold on planet Earth. And then they found that it was a very back-breaking exercise. So according to the Sumerian tablets, they took an existing hominid species in southern Africa and they modified their genetic code to make a slave race out of them to dig in the mines of South Africa. And they mined the gold and then took it back to their home planet. And then at one stage, these human beings became too many and too noisy. And they figured out we need to wipe out this experiment. It's not working anymore. And they created this extraordinary flood. And they wiped out everybody except, a small group of people. And there was actually a division in the council between two brothers, a guy called Enki, who was kind of in charge of Project Earth, and a guy called Enlil, who was higher up in the hierarchy. Enlil wanted to destroy the entire planet and all life on the planet because of the cacophony that it was raising. Enki decided to spill the beans and to tell a character, and he's named in the Sumerian tablets, to build some kind of a device to save life forms, and that the saving wasn't taking two into every species, it was extracting the genetic code of all the different life forms on the planet and storing it on some kind of a craft. And then the flood came and destroyed everything, but this one craft had escaped. Those writings go back, the Sumerian legends go back at least 7,000 years. So they're much, much older than the Hebrew scriptures. So that's the story of the Anunnaki. And there's some very interesting books written about that period by a guy called Zechariah Sitchin. Right. So the first question has to do with seeing into the future. I believe that there are 7 timelines when we're wrestling with a human understanding of time. So there are two versions of the past, there are 2 versions of the present, and there are 3 versions of the future. So the first version of the past is what actually happened, what really went down on planet Earth over the eons, and we're obviously the product of that and influenced by that. But there's a second version of the past, which is that which was written by the winners, the historians. And that version of the past is different from the other version of the past, but we've been hugely influenced by that as well, because that's what we've read. And so that's a huge influence. So the 2 versions of the past influence us. There are 2 versions of the present. There is what's really happening in our world right now, and we're really being influenced by that. And there's the propaganda that tells us what's happening in the world right now, the misinformation and the disinformation and the malinformation, and we're being influenced by that. So we're being influenced by 2 versions of the present. And there are 3 versions of the future that we're influenced by. The first one is a kind of a deterministic notion that, there is no such thing as free will. There's a predetermined outcome, and we're inevitably moving towards that endpoint. Now, I totally disagree with that. I do not agree with that. So that leaves with 2 other versions of the future. One is the probable future, what the future is going to look like if we don't change what we're doing. If everybody continues to behave in the way we've been behaving, that's the very probable outcome. So that you can pretty much gauge what the end result of that is going to be. And then the other version is the possible future. What could happen if we woke up, even as a small community, even if there's enough of us, to make the change for the bigger group. So that's the possible future. What happens if we wake up and we don't go back to sleep? then there's a very different outcome. And so then in looking into the future, you can see what actually is going to happen, but you can predict very accurately what is likely to happen if we don't change, and then what's possible to happen if we do change. So in this experience of mine, and subsequently, and in many, many incarnations, I'm holding out this possible future, and I'm trying to live my life to try to wake up people to the possible future, so that together we can create little bands that get together, and create, a lattice work of light workers. And I remember a very powerful visionary experience I had many, many years ago, where I saw the planet Earth from space, and I could see a grid of what I can only describe as light workers. Like where every line of longitude and line of latitude intersected, there was a being of light stationed, and one at the North Pole and one at the South Pole. And when I calculated that, it is 64,442 beings of light. Now, that's just a metaphor. But what is said to me is that literally our little planet is surrounded by light beings. And just last year, I wrote a manifesto, and I read it out during homilies. I called it the Light Workers Manifesto. What the manifesto is for anybody who wants to come awake. And so for me, it's a question then of, trying to disseminate this and interacting with small communities, like networking together. We need to end the centralization of power, whether it's economic power or political power or financial power or religious power or medical power or educational power or care of the young power. It needs to be much more kind of regionalized and localized and almost like at the village level, villages raising babies rather than the mass media raising our children. So that is the possible future that I see and I envisage. And I'm really convinced that we can make it happen. So that was an answer to your first part of your question, Joanna. The second part then was about, Ireland's recognition or my recognition on that first encounter. I have to say that on that first encounter, I thought she was a very good-looking woman. I'm here as celibate priest, sitting under a tree reading autobiography of a yogi. She's married. And so the idea of being together romantically wasn't on the cards whatsoever. Now, it was just after Ireland's 40th birthday, and she had some premonitions that there was going to be a very significant event happening during her 40th year. So her birthday is March the 8th, and we encountered each other on May the 20th in 1988. So literally within 2 months of her premonitional experiences was our first encounter. But for me personally, it was like, I'm slow, I'm a male of the species, so it took me much longer to wake up to the realization, this is my anamachara. We say in Gaelic, anamachara means a soul friend, or the word that she used in Hebrew is besherta, you are my besherta. So it's like a soul friend or a soulmate. It took me a lot longer to figure that out than it took her. The question is again, if we are co-creators, of a possible future, and we're part of the solution to present predicaments, what happens when we've accomplished our goal? Do we fold up our tents at that stage? Are we going to be kind of merged with source completely and it's kind of game over? Or are we going to continue to be spectators and watch other people in the arena playing the basketball games? Or, what's the more exciting scenario? So there's this great Buddhist teaching of the Bodhisattva. And the Bodhisattva is the teaching that there are some souls who are so enlightened that they have no karma to work off anymore. They've learned what planet Earth could possibly teach them, so they don't need to be here. But that they volunteer to come back for the sake of the rest of us who are still asleep at the wheel and still haven't woken up sufficiently. So I think in some senses that anybody who volunteers for life on planet Earth has some element of the Bodhisattva in them, because you hear me say this later in a different lecture. I believe that the cosmos is a playground, and that planet Earth is one of the scariest rides in the playground, and that takes a lot of courage for a soul to volunteer for planet Earth, and so coming down here already means a lot of courage for us. So the question then becomes is, if you get to a place where you've learned everything you can learn about incarnation on planet Earth, do you now want to be a spectator and allow the rest of us to kind of fumble around until we find our way? Or do you want to insert yourself again into the game even though you are an enlightened being. So that's one question. So only the individual soul can determine that. The second consideration is that there is a myriad of galaxies. There are literally billions of galaxies. There are billions of planetary systems scattered throughout these. And that's just talking about the dense kind of the universe of physical matter in which we find ourselves. But there are levels of reality, all the ways up to pure light. And so there are ways of experiencing separation from God, which does not involve being in this kind of a physical, three-dimensional, dense spacesuit. So it's possible that some souls want to experience life in other places. And I'll actually talk about that in a lecture either today or tomorrow. So there's a myriad of choices awaiting the soul. Total immersion. So one image is that every human being is like a wave from the ocean washing up onto a beach and depositing little droplets of water, and then the wave recedes. And there are these little droplets of water, total beautiful spheres, sparkling in the sunlight and radiating all the colors of the rainbow, and thinking, oh, what a fine guy am I. Look at me, I'm sparkling. And then the next wave comes up and it takes you back into the ocean. Because, it's more important, the ocean of the drop is more important than the drop of the ocean. So the sense of separation from source is a lesser experience than the sense of unification with source. So when you seed individuality, you're not kind of depleting your experience, you're magnifying infinitely what your experience is like. It's like the difference between being a cell and being an organism. So the cell does not seed its individuality, but now it's experiencing life as a human being. So when the little drop of water is reunited with the ocean, it's not that it's lost its individuality and it can no longer experience its dropletlessness, but that it has a higher sense of self, which I am the ocean. And so it's a magnified sense of self, not a diminished self of self. So whichever trajectory you take, you're going to find yourself in a situation where if you make the right kinds of choices, there's a magnification of the experience as you draw deeper and deeper into the bosom of Source.